Today is day 6 of the June 90 7-day retreat in Springwater. Since this will probably be the last time we bring up questions and talk from these questions, tomorrow we will probably read. And I haven't decided yet which of these questions to take up. I will read them as they come. Sometimes people have mentioned to me that they have found that very interesting. All the different concerns that have been voiced. Can one really ever observe the self truthfully, objectively, without deceiving oneself? And why do we do it? Why do we do this self-inquiry? What is openness? Shouldn't we have an I? Don't we need it to get up in the morning? To do what we're doing in this society? Isn't it all right to have a storyline? To hear about people's lives, which are expressed in storylines, in stories about their lives? Isn't it of value to find out about each other's stories? Aren't religious ceremonies one way of opening us up to whatever wholeness, religious experience? What can I take home from this week? Is there anything to take home? And if there isn't, what's the point of it? You talk a lot about creating images, divisive nature of images, but what about creative imagination? For instance, in building a simple place for oneself. Is that just the expression of desire? Gestalt psychologists say one can only be aware of one thing at a time. And you talk about being aware of many things at the same time. How is that possible? Don't children have to have or develop an ego? And another question was, don't they have one, regardless of whether their parents have one or not? I feel, this was a someone saying this very early in retreat, I feel very isolated. And at the same time, I feel that I'm the only one who is stuck here. Do other people feel the same way? Would it be possible that you arranged for some meetings where you could meet with a number of people, those of us who would like to hear whether other people feel as isolated and stuck as I do? Just hearing you say that we're all alike is not enough, the person continued. I'd like to hear it directly from other people. Maybe we can start with why do this? Why do we do this self-inquiry? Why do we want to find out about ourselves? And is it even possible to do that truthfully, objectively, without deceiving ourselves? The person who reported feeling the intense pain and agony of isolation. And the yearning to hear from others. Do you feel like I do? Does that ring or resonate with all of us? Not maybe at this moment, but at another or many moments of our past. Right now, in thinking about it, for myself, it brings up a memory. Long ago, about 30 years ago, driving, we used to take Sunday drives, which I did not care for very much, through the country. It had been a tradition in my husband's family. On Sunday afternoon, if it was raining, to take a drive through the country. I'm about to say something sad. But it is funny, isn't it, how we amuse ourselves? And usually, since it was raining on days when we took the drive, the windows were closed of the car. And we had this little baby. We had adopted a little baby. I had a towel on my shoulder, and here was this drooling little baby on my shoulder. And the three of us riding through the countryside, and an intense feeling of pain inside me. I don't think ever before or after was there such a stark realization of isolation, separateness from everything, from my husband, from this little baby, and particularly from what we were driving through, from the fields and the tree lines, like here, the hedgerows of trees which surrounded the fields. Intense pain of not being part of that, not being in touch with that, having nothing to do with it, the early Romans or Greeks, I don't know who invented it, probably was invented before them, thought up as the hardest punishment, the severest punishment for someone that was to be punished because he or she transgressed the rules, to ostracize them. Put them someplace where they were cut off completely from their country, from their loved ones, from their family, from everyone. Onto an island, usually. The human brain inventing punishment according to what somehow or other it knows is the greatest of pains, the greatest of suffering, and then to impose that on someone to punish them. In our daily life, we may have managed to so distract ourselves from this existing pain of isolation, loneliness, cut-offness, that we don't feel it. There's immense stimulation available in our present-day living to keep this body bombarded, so that the chemicals keep circulating and pouring out. And of course, endless thinking and imagining and dreaming. Entering into relationships, even though what one dreads most is being alone, and therefore not being able to relate, because we cannot relate to each other if we don't understand aloneness without suffering. Aloneness which has no pain in it, no sorrow, no cut-offness, no isolation. If that is not understood in some way or another, to some degree or another, our entering into relationships and clinging to them, or being clung to, produces pain and conflict. Fear of losing, fear of being left, abandoned. Fear of being possessed, or the urge to possess someone who resists being possessed. Doesn't this all come out of no clarity about what aloneness is, without isolation, without suffering? I've jumped ahead. We were with feeling cut off, wanting to hear others tell us about their cut-offness, and the hope that in hearing others express it, there will be a relief, some alleviation of the pain, which does happen. For whatever we're aching, if we hear from others that they're aching in the same way, there is some feeling of relief. And there are, all over the country, I read it in Newsweek, support groups springing up to support every suffering, ache and pain, or addiction that we may be experiencing, to find like-minded people to support us in that, in the feeling, not necessarily in the addiction. I don't know whether there are support groups for that too. Probably are. Why not support each other in our addictedness? I read that there's a support group for those people who have no support group. The person said, hearing you say that we all suffer from the same pains and problems, that's not enough. I need to hear it from someone else. But is hearing it from someone else enough? Even though it brings relief to share in our suffering. How long does the relief last until the pain overtakes it? The pain of isolation, cut-offness, maybe in the midst of a family. And not an abusive family. Feeling cut off. Out of touch, out of contact with the people and the fields, the trees, the sky, out of contact. Why do we feel this way? And everyone here knows that feeling. Maybe it's there right now, or it was there just a few minutes ago, yesterday, or this morning. For me, in the course of that day, and then at night talking some to my husband about it, I realized I had to do something. This couldn't go on like that. I had to find out about that. I was considering even seeing a therapist about it, but somehow or other I did not trust that that would help. There seemed something so deep, so fundamental about this. And I do forget what was in between that and 8 years later of starting sitting. Although there was a lot of reading. That's what was going on, a lot of reading. Which seemed enormously helpful, to read and then let go of this particular point of view and read another one and let go of that. Always learning or unlearning something about oneself. A lot of unlearning about what one had assumed is so about a human being, psychologically and otherwise, to air it, let go of it. So why do we do this here? Am I speaking for everyone? To find out about this sense of cut-offness, loneliness, separation, isolation. Which inhabits human beings the world over and has done so for centuries, centuries, centuries. How can we find out about ourselves when we're done with reading about ourselves? When reading about ourselves has gained some insight, mostly intellectual. And yet the feeling of cut-offness and separation persists. How can we find out about ourselves? Directly, immediately, truthfully, as the person asked, objectively, without deceiving ourselves. Can one start in utter simplicity, quietly sitting down someplace, or if one wishes to stand up, lie down, quietly being someplace and watching what's going on, watching, listening, attending? These are all very equivalent words. But the word itself is not that actual state of inwardness, of inward opening up. To what? To the closedness, if that's what's there? Can there be an opening up to feeling closed up? Sounds so paradoxical, but it's possible. To start in utter simplicity with what is there, right here, in front of us, within us, this moment, and listen. Feel, touch, look, all the senses, not separated through all kinds of previous knowledge, but innocently inquiring and perceiving what's there. Not what should be there or what I would like to be there, but what is there. At this moment of feeling so painfully cut off. Not looking to someone else to tell me how he or she feels. That may be helpful. But right now, how does it feel? And can that be felt truthfully, without self-deceit? One doesn't know. One has to start. And as soon as there's image and idea of how I ought to feel, that colors our perception. We've talked about this a lot during this retreat. Any image of what I should be like, or any shame about what I may be like, fear about it, anger or humiliation, whatever all the images bring, doesn't help in looking at the thoughts and feelings that are actually manifesting right now. So can one see the limiting quality of images about myself and listen without them? Just to what is actually going on in thought and feeling and emotion, sensation, feeling numbness if it's numb. Why do this, a person says. Why are we doing this? Why are we? No one is prescribing it. No one says you have to do it. Except oneself may have no choice left but to look, to inquire into something one feels is killing oneself or making one walk half dead. And one can inquire at the same time whether it isn't the sense of the painful sense of isolation that drives human beings into all the destructive activity that we're capable of. With the sense of isolation goes the sense of utter unworth, insufficiency, trying to compensate for that, trying to cling to people, groups, organizations, to find one's worth and solidarity in that, which it does, it provides that, but one has abdicated something to the group. The autonomy of looking and thinking for oneself, even if it's painful what is looked at. Having to conform to the collective of which one becomes a part, out of this fear of cut-offness and loneliness. And the power of collectives we are all aware of, whether they be nations or racial groups, hate groups, ideological groups, to give stimulation to the individual members, hating someone else to feel solidarity within. Not just hating, but moving in on it, warring, killing others. Does it all come back to the sense of individual isolation, the pain of it, the suffering of it, the despair of it, and seeking a way out other than looking within? Sometimes people ask, well, aren't we forming a collective here too? Always talk about the other collectives, aren't we one here? Are we? Are we being shaped by collective ideas, conforming to standards? Are we? Can one question it, each one of us? Or are we looking at what we are, alone and collectively, from moment to moment? Not conforming to some rules or standards other than what is necessary to keep a quiet retreat going. But trying to find out in one human being what ails all human beings. And not moving away from that. Sticking it out, as it were. This feeling of, it's been so variously described as isolation or inner emptiness, inner shallowness. Nothing there to hold on to inspire one. And as one person put it, faking one's way in the everyday life. And yet sitting alone, seeing through the faking and faced with the starkness of aloneness, emptiness, shallowness. Can one be with that? No matter what? Unconditionally? And not cut out through concentrating upon it, the sound of the birds. Not so concentrated or involved with this problem of pain within that there's no looking at the sky or clouds or leaves grasses and flowers. But letting that be too. Is that possible? Sometimes people tell me it's not possible when there's this intense pain of cut-offness. That's what it is. No touch with the fields. And I know, I went through it myself. But beware of the conclusions of the mind, of the brain, the thoughts, that what has been up till now will continue to be so for all eternity. And there's no hope, no way out, no exit. Can one beware of such conclusions and not be fooled by them, not put credence, belief into them? On a 6th day of retreat, is there some openness? Some silent openness to everything that's going on inside and out? There may be pain, there may be burden, but there's also the air, the movement of the leaves in the wind, sound of the plane, and that it all takes place in an immense space of silence. Does one get a glimpse of that every once in a while? A glimpse of hearing, the silence of every movement within and outside. Sitting on the deck or on a bench or in the grass. The slightest of movements of leaves and trees and clouds. Birds on the wing, their calls back and forth. Can one hear and feel the utter silence of it all? Breathing, the heartbeat, sensations in the body, thoughts arising, feelings arising, the wind blowing. Is there any separation? Or does it all happen in one whole silence? The thought arising, I don't have that silence or I want that silence, that thought creates the isolation, doesn't it? Participates in it. But it's just a thought. In truth, where is the separation if there is no thought about being separate? Alone. Cut off. If it's a deep, deep feeling, can one plumb to the deepest of depth to get in touch with that feeling, what it is? And the deeper the inquiry, the quieter the mind in listening and looking, the less one will find. Because in truth there is nothing that we are other than a palpitating, alive body, sharing the alive movement in silence. Thought and talk provide the noise, the chatter, and all the ambitions and the driving and striving and getting. But when thought quiets down for a moment, not grasping or striving for anything, just quiet in the listening to what there is inside, if anything. What is there? Other than a thought that has been and can be remembered. Someone asked, are you alluding to some ideal state that I should attain? Of a person without thoughts and in touch and whole. That's the danger of talking in this way, isn't it? Of expressing something that is taking place. For all of us, if we know it or not, if we're in touch with it or not. But it is not describing a state that should be attained. Because then we're back in the same rut of wanting something that we imagine to be better than what is there. What we're asking is, what is there right now? And not try to figure it out. Thought cannot figure it out. Thought always limps behind. The actual vibrant moment that can't be thought or imagined. It can only be. And it is not a different moment for a tree and for a person, for a deer. It's one whole, undivided, who knows what. Does thought understand that in trying to figure something out, it is limping behind? It has to deal with something that was? That this instant before a thought arises is unthinkable? But it is there. As clear as the sound of leaves rustling and birds calling. Breath and heart, heat and cold. These are words, but what they point at is not words. Then what is it without words? without trying or needing to figure it out. We will end here for today.